In the northern hills of Eldermoor, a rugged village nestled between wind-worn mountains and deep pine forests, lived a woman named Isla Fenley. At 33, she was the village's only healer, a role passed down through generations in her family. Her hands, though young, bore the stiffness of old souls. Her dark auburn hair was always tied back in a thick braid, tucked beneath a linen scarf, and her sharp hazel eyes rarely rested. The people of Eldermoor respected her, even revered her, for she had cured fevers that left others helpless, tended to birthing mothers under starlight, and mended wounds both physical and unseen. But reverence was a lonely reward. Isla's cottage stood on the edge of the village, a modest stone dwelling with a wild herb garden creeping around the back. Though her door was always open to the sick and weary, few stayed long once their ailments were cured. She never asked for coin, just quiet. Her life was defined by tinctures, late-night knockings, and the ever-burning hearth at the center of her home, which never went cold, no matter the season. People called it the flame of the Fenleys, an old enchantment kindled by her grandmother decades ago, said to grant clarity and healing. Only Isla knew its true cost, how it flickered with her energy, dimmed when she was weary, and roared when she was angry. But Isla never let it falter, not even for a breath. Because in her mind, if the flame died, so would she. She didn't sleep much. She didn't eat properly. And she certainly didn't rest. Every sunrise began the same. She ground herbs with numb fingers, checked her stores, and tended to villagers with quiet efficiency. When no one knocked, she kept busy by cleaning tools, boiling linen strips, or reciting old healing chants from her mother's journals. Her grandmother, Seren Fenley, lived a half-day's walk away in the deep woods beyond the glade. At 90, Seren was a woman of silent strength, her skin the color of worn bark and her hair a silver waterfall that fell freely to her waist. Her hut was barely more than a crooked roof and earthen floor, but it pulsed with wisdom. People used to call her a witch, until Isla's cures softened their fear. Seren had long since passed her mantle to Isla, but she remained the last timber of the old ways, of balance, of listening to the land, of honoring rest as sacred. Isla, however, was far too consumed by her duty to visit often. "Still stoking your fire too hot, child?" Seren would ask during their rare visits, her voice gravelly but kind. Isla always smiled. "The fire keeps people alive. Only if it doesn't burn you first," Seren would say, every time, as she poured tea laced with root extract into a clay cup. "Above all else, guard your flame. For everything you do flows from it." Isla would nod, never disagreeing out loud, but the warning rolled off her back like rain off a wax leaf. She had people to heal. There was no time to worry about her own heat. That winter, a cough began spreading through Eldermoor. At first, it was mild. Children sneezed, elders felt chilled. But soon the symptoms grew darker, fevers that wouldn't break, rashes like fire across the chest, breathlessness. Isla barely slept for a week. She mixed salves by moonlight and crushed pine bark in mortar bowls with hands blistered from cold and steam. She visited homes on foot in the snow, her skirts wet to the knee, her fingers raw. She worked through it all. Even when her own chest began to tighten. Even when she started forgetting the end of old chants. Even when the flame in her hearth began to flicker low. One morning, she awoke sprawled on the floor beside her herbal rack, face cold against the stone. Her head pounded. Her breath was shallow. The flame had dimmed to a pale blue shimmer. She tried to stand, but her legs shook. Through blurred vision, she saw a shadow moving near her door. A young boy from the village, Elric, stood holding a small clay pot, his eyes wide with concern. "Miss Isla," he said in a trembling voice. "You didn't come to help Maida. He's worse." Isla tried to speak, but her voice cracked dryly. "I can't." He stepped closer. "Should I get someone?" Her pride flared, but it collapsed as quickly as it came. She had no strength left to fight. "Go to the woods," she whispered, "to the glade. Find Seren Fenley. Tell her the flame is dying." Elric ran. Isla closed her eyes, her body limp. The flame behind her pulsed once. Then began to fade. When she opened her eyes again, it was night. The scent of elderflower and willow bark drifted through the air. Her body, tucked beneath wool blankets, a cool hand pressing a poultice to her forehead. "You stubborn girl," came Seren's voice. Isla blinked. Her grandmother sat beside the hearth, now roaring with orange gold light once more. Her gaze was steady, unreadable. "You pushed beyond your edges. Let the flame burn too long without feeding it properly. You almost went with it." "I had to," Isla croaked. "No," Seren said firmly. "You chose to." Tears welled in Isla's eyes. "They needed me. And now you need you." Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the gentle crackle of fire. Seren took Isla's hand. "Do you think the forest never sleeps? That the sun never sets? Everything in nature has its rhythm. And so do you. You cannot be healer and martyr. The flame gives life only when it is tended with love, not just for others, but for yourself." Isla wept quietly. For the exhaustion. The shame. The years she'd worn herself thin, thinking it noble. "I didn't know how to stop," she whispered. "Then let this be your beginning," Seren said. "Let it begin with you." The days that followed Isla's collapse were unlike anything she'd known. There were no villagers knocking. No smoke signals from nearby farms. No baskets of sick children at her doorstep. Only quiet, deep and unflinching. Her body, still fragile, resisted movement. But what truly startled her was the silence within. The inner chatter she'd long mistaken for motivation had fallen mute. There was no pressure. Only space. And it terrified her. Seren kept her in the glade. Her grandmother's home wasn't much more than a crooked cabin surrounded by gnarled trees and ancient moss, but it held a kind of sacred pulse, like the earth itself exhaled here. Ivy grew wild along the porch posts. Wind chimes made from carved bones whispered in the breeze. A small stone fountain burbled near the edge of a herb-laden path. It was, in every way, the antithesis of Isla's world. And at first, she hated it. The first morning after her arrival, Isla tried to rise early. She attempted to reach for her satchel to brew a fever leaf tonic, out of habit more than necessity, but Seren's firm voice halted her. "No fire brewing, no mixing," Seren called from the garden. "Your job is to sit. Or sleep. Whichever one your body begs for." Isla protested weakly. "I'm wasting time." Seren poked her head in through the low doorway. "Time doesn't belong to you, child. It belongs to the earth. You're borrowing it. Best treat it with respect." So Isla sat. She watched the fire crackle. She watched the light shift across the floor. She dozed. She woke. She read old pages from herbal books, but couldn't focus. Her hands, so used to constant work, itched. Her mind rattled with guilt, of not healing, not serving. On the third day, Seren handed her a wooden bowl filled with crushed petals, dirt, and seeds. "Come. The garden needs new voices." Isla followed her grandmother into the overgrown plot behind the house. There were stone-lined beds bursting with herbs Isla had only read about in passing, sunroot, bitterthorn, shade moss. Between them ran narrow paths made of river stones and crumbled bark. "Speak as you plant," Seren instructed, handing Isla a small iron trowel. "Tell them who you are. What you need. And don't expect them to rush." Isla blinked. "Talk. To the herbs? Of course. They don't grow just for science. They grow for those who listen." Reluctantly, Isla knelt in the soil, still stiff from her days of fatigue. She dug a small hollow in the dirt and placed a seed inside. Her voice was tentative. "I'm Isla Fenley," she said. "I've forgotten how to be still." She covered the seed and moved to the next. "I'm afraid that if I stop moving, I'll become irrelevant. Empty." The soil crumbled through her fingers. "I want to be more than what I do for others. But I don't know how." By the fifth seed, she was crying. Not from pain, but from the strange relief of being heard by something that wouldn't answer, wouldn't judge, only grow. Seren placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're learning, child. That's good." That evening, after a quiet meal of broth and wild greens, Seren brought out a bundle of old letters wrapped in faded ribbon. "These," she said, "are from your mother. When she was your age." Isla's breath caught. Her mother had passed when she was 16, also healer, also consumed by her duty. "I didn't know she wrote these. She didn't want you to carry the same burden she did. But I think you're ready to read them now." By lantern light, Isla opened the first letter. Dear Mother. Some nights I dream I am a tree, rooted too deeply to run, but stretched too thin to stay whole. The villagers come with their cuts and bruises, and I give them bark, leaves, shade. But I forget to water my own roots. Isla read each word like it was being whispered directly into her soul. The letters were raw, unfiltered. Her mother had wrestled with the same fears, being needed more than being seen. Healing others while losing herself piece by piece. There was comfort in knowing the struggle wasn't new. But there was also sorrow in realizing how deeply it could scar. Seren watched her granddaughter with quiet knowing. She didn't die from disease, Isla. She died from emptiness. Giving until there was nothing left. Isla swallowed hard. I don't want to be a hollow healer. Then stop acting like one, Seren said gently. You have to learn that rest isn't a pause in your purpose, it is your purpose. Because you carry the flame now. And a flame must be fed, not only shared. In the days that followed, Isla's recovery deepened, not just in her body, but in her spirit. She woke with the sun, walked barefoot in the grass, and sat with her thoughts like they were old friends instead of enemies. The fire inside her, once overburdened and chaotic, began to glow evenly again. Not a wildfire, but a hearth. She learned how to press flowers for tea without crushing their medicine oils. How to read clouds for changes in wind and mood. She learned to prepare healing oils not from haste, but with ceremony, chanting softly as she poured, honoring the process. Most importantly, she learned to smile when doing nothing at all. One morning, Seren approached her holding a mirror, a small copper plate that reflected her face in warm light. Look, she said. Do you recognize her? Isla stared. Her eyes, once sharp with stress, were softer now. Her posture was looser, but not from weakness, from release. Her hair, no longer bound in severity, was braided loosely with sprigs of rosemary and sage. I see someone learning to be whole, she whispered. Seren nodded. Then you are ready for the next chapter. Isla tilted her head. Which is? Seren smiled faintly. Returning. The morning air was thick with mist, curling around the trees like whispers from another realm. Isla had been at the glade for nearly 3 weeks now, and for the first time in years, she woke without a sense of urgency clawing at her chest. She dressed slowly, methodically, letting the process be a kind of meditation. She no longer reached for her apron or her satchel of remedies. These days, her first act was to step barefoot onto the back porch, close her eyes, and breathe. On this particular morning, Seren was gone, off foraging in the deeper forest, where mushrooms clung to the underbelly of old elms and deer tread silently through moss. Isla took the rare moment alone to tidy. She folded linens, organized jars of dried herbs, and swept the hearth where the old family flame had flickered just hours ago. That's when she noticed it. The stone beneath the hearth was uneven, not like natural wear, but as if something had been wedged into the earth and forgotten. Kneeling, she brushed aside soot and ash. Her fingers found a seam, and she pried the loose stone up. Beneath it lay a wrapped bundle, cloth faded with time and tied with the same fern twine Seren used for tea satchels. Isla hesitated. The air around her shifted, still, reverent. She untied the bundle carefully. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age but lovingly preserved. A single sprig of dried lavender was tucked inside the front flap. On the inside cover, written in soft, looping script, were the words. To my daughter Isla. One day, you will need what I could never say aloud. Isla Fenley. Isla's breath caught. Her mother's journal. Her hands trembled as she flipped the first page. The night before I gave birth to you, I dreamed I was standing in a circle of fire. Not burning, but warming, surrounding me with strength. When I awoke, I knew your name would mean strength too. Isla, the firekeeper. Everyone celebrated your birth. They called you the next great Fenley, the healer destined to surpass us all. I was proud. But terrified. I saw how quickly love from a village turns into expectation. They don't mean harm. But they take and take. Today you are 5, and you ran through the garden with a crown of daisies. You told me you would grow up to be just like me. I smiled. But in my heart, I whispered a prayer, let her grow beyond me. Let her know when to rest. Page after page, Isla read. Her mother had documented her own struggles, trying to balance healing others and preserving herself. There were entries filled with joy. How Leora taught Isla to brew flower tea or catch frogs near the brook, but many were laced with quiet anguish. One entry stood out. I am losing pieces of myself. Slowly. I forget to eat. I wake from sleep unsure of the day. I smile at villagers while feeling hollow. I don't let Isla see. She needs me to be strong. But I am afraid that in trying to be everything for everyone, I will become nothing for myself. Or worse, for her. Isla covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. Her mother had lived with such pain, and had hidden it so carefully. And now, all these years later, Isla had walked the same path. Nearly crumbled under the same weight. She turned to the final page. The ink was faint, written in a shaky hand. If she finds this. Isla, my star child. I'm sorry I didn't teach you how to stop. I only ever showed you how to go. But fire uncontained becomes destruction. Guard your flame. Feed it with laughter, not just duty. Let others carry the burden with you. You were never meant to bear it alone. I loved you beyond the limits of my strength. But now, I pray you love yourself beyond the limits of mine. The journal slipped from Isla's hands to her lap, where it rested like a heartbeat. Outside, the forest pulsed with life. A sparrow darted past the window. In the distance, a deer rustled through leaves. For the first time, Isla understood her grandmother's mantra, not as a healer's warning, but as a lineage of wisdom passed from mother to daughter. Guard your heart. Guard your flame. Not to shield it, but to feed it. When Seren returned later that afternoon, Isla was waiting on the porch, the journal in her hands. Seren looked at her for a long time. You found it. You knew I would? I hoped. I wasn't ready to give it to you. But she was. Isla stood and embraced her grandmother, no words, no explanations. Just the quiet gravity of two women holding generations of sorrow and strength between them. That night, Isla lit the fire herself. She placed the journal on the mantel. As the flame roared to life, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Mama." In the following days, Isla continued to heal. But now, her healing wasn't just physical. It was generational. She wrote her own thoughts in a new journal, recording what the soil taught her, what the fire revealed, what silence whispered into her bones. She asked Seren to teach her the old ways, the rituals, the songs, the meanings behind the plants beyond their medicinal properties. Magic isn't just in the cure, Seren told her. It's in the care. By the end of the week, Isla stood stronger than she had in years, not because her muscles were rested, but because her soul was finally rooted. And she knew now that one day, she too would pass down a journal. But not one filled only with duty. One filled with joy. The day Isla left the glade, the forest was quiet, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Her pack was light. She carried no tinctures, no surgical tools, no bundles of dried herbs straining her shoulders like they once did. Instead, she carried a small satchel filled with seed pouches, 2 journals, her mother's and her own, and a locket from Seren with the pressed fire blossom sealed inside. At the edge of the forest path, Seren stood waiting, staff in hand. "You're ready," she said softly, her gaze steady. "But don't mistake readiness for rushing." "I won't," Isla replied. "You remember what I told you?" Isla smiled. "To walk with the land, not ahead of it." Seren nodded. "And? To guard my flame. Not with fear, but with care." The old woman pressed her forehead gently to Isla's. "Then go. And remember, you are not returning to save them. You are returning to live among them." Isla turned toward the winding path that led to Eldermoor and began the journey home. The village had not changed much. Stone cottages still curved around the hillside like sheep in a fold. The forge still spat smoke from its black chimney. The apothecary's cracked sign still swayed from a rusted hook. Children chased chickens across muddy lanes, and old men argued about cider at the tavern steps. But what had changed, was Isla. She walked not like a burdened healer on call, but like a woman who belonged to the earth. Her steps were slow but purposeful. Her eyes, once starting with clinical alertness, now moved with softness, absorbing texture and color, not just data. She no longer wore her long coat of dark wool but a simple tunic woven in forest hues, her braid adorned with sprigs of thyme and blue hyssop. When she reached her cottage, she stood for a long moment in the overgrown garden. It was wild now. Vines curled around the fence posts, the herbal beds were overtaken with dandelions and wild clover. It was beautiful. She stepped inside. The hearth was cold, for the first time in months. She knelt before it, gently placed a new bundle of herbs in the pit, and lit it with a simple flame from a beeswax taper. As the fire sparked to life, she whispered, "Not for them. For me." Then she sat in stillness, watching it breathe. Word spread quickly that Isla Fenley had returned. Villagers began to knock, curious, respectful, but expectant. But this time, she didn't open the door immediately. Instead, she placed a woven basket on the porch each morning with fresh tea bundles, basic remedies, and slips of paper that read, "I am healing too. Please take what you need. If your spirit is quiet, come sit with me in the garden. If it is noisy, walk until it slows, then return." Some scoffed. Others waited. But eventually, they came. They came not as patients demanding miracles, but as people seeking presence. One day, an old woman arrived trembling from grief over her husband's death. Isla didn't prescribe an elixir. She made lavender broth and held the woman's hand. A young man brought his infant, colicky and inconsolable. Isla didn't rush to concoct a potion. She wrapped the child in a warm swaddle, pressed him to her chest, and sang an old song her mother once hummed by candlelight. She treated fewer emergencies, but performed more healing than ever before. Then came the knock that changed everything. It was Elric. No longer the boy who had once fetched Seren from the woods, he stood now at 15, taller, voice deeper, but eyes still wide with quiet understanding. "My da's not well," he said, wringing his cap. "I think it's time." Isla placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did right by coming." She followed him to the far side of the village, where Elric's father, Ren, a burly man who once mocked potions and swore only by iron and ale, now lay frail beneath a wool blanket. His breath rattled. His skin had turned gray beneath his beard. Ren blinked open. "Healer," he rasped. "Friend," Isla corrected softly. She didn't pull herbs or reach for syringes. She sat by his side and took his hand. "Are you ready to rest?" He nodded slowly. She placed a bundle of valerian and winter mint by his pillow, soaked a cloth with warmed sage oil, and pressed it to his brow. She sang softly, no spell, no miracle. Just the lullaby from her mother's journal, passed down through fire and forest. By sundown, Ren was gone. Not in pain. Not afraid. Elric cried into Isla's shoulder. "He was afraid you wouldn't come." "I almost didn't," she whispered. "But I remembered, I'm not here to rescue. I'm here to witness. And to love." In the days that followed, Isla opened her home more fully. But with boundaries. She placed a sign outside her garden gate. "Open from sunrise until moonrise. If I'm not here, tend to the plants. Healing begins in the soil, not the bottle." She began to host evening circles for young apprentices, those curious not just about medicine, but about listening. She taught them how to hear the song of a fever, the whisper in a wound. Not how to fix, how to hold. Her journals became guides. She began compiling her mother's and her own writings into a manuscript she titled, "The Flamekeeper's Heart." At the back, she left a blank section. "For the next healer," she wrote. "Who I hope will burn brighter, but slower." Seren visited once a month. Sometimes for tea, sometimes just to sit. "You've done well," she said one twilight. "I'm still learning." Seren smirked. "Good. That means you're still alive." They watched the fire flicker. Isla turned to her. "Do you think I've guarded my flame well?" Seren looked into her eyes. "You've done more. You've shared it. Without losing it." That night, as the fire burned low, Isla placed a single page above the mantel. "Above all else, guard your heart. For everything you do flows from it." And beneath it, in smaller ink, "Let others guard it with you." Seasons turned over the village of Eldermoor like slow pages in a book, and with each turn, Isla Fenley grew into a version of herself that once felt impossible. The healer, once defined by urgency and exhaustion, now carried a gentle steadiness. She still wore her braid and her herbs, but they no longer bound her, they crowned her. The flame in her hearth, once wild and flickering from overuse, now burned with rhythm, its orange glow a pulse that matched her own. Her cottage had changed too. What was once a place of rushed remedies and half-eaten meals had become a sanctuary, not just for Isla, but for others. Villagers would come, not just in times of illness, but for moments of quiet. They brought food to share, flowers to plant, and letters to read aloud by the fire. It became a place of collective healing, not obligation. But time is a soft thief, and even peace must make room for change. Seren, Isla's beloved grandmother, began to slow. Her hands, once quick with shears and sharp with wisdom, grew tremulous. Her walks through the forest became fewer, shorter. She forgot certain herbs. Mixed up names. One afternoon, she placed mint instead of marjoram into a tea bundle and stared at it for minutes, confused and still. Isla noticed. And she did not panic. Instead, she guided her grandmother through the same grace that once brought her back to life. "You taught me to listen," she said. "Now let me listen to you." Seren smiled through tear-glossed eyes. "The forest echoes in you now, child. You don't need me to hear it anymore." "I'll always need you," Isla replied. "But now, I also carry you." The turning point came on a soft spring evening. A group of young apprentices sat around Isla's table, 3 girls and a boy, all between 16 and 20, wide-eyed and eager, notebooks full of questions and half-formed theories. They had come to learn herbs. What they learned was much more. Isla shared not just cures, but care. Not just practices, but pauses. She taught them that a healer's hands must not only know how to work, but how to rest. That silence was as essential as salve. That presence was more healing than potions. "You are not made of stone," she told them. "You are soil, meant to nurture and be nurtured. You cannot bloom where you do not root." It was during one of these sessions that she realized the legacy was no longer something she was reviving, it was something she was now passing on. That night, she pulled out the old journal again. Her mother's words still etched deep into the leather, the lavender still pressed between pages. And after them, her own entries, stories of learning, of falling, of rebuilding. But at the back, there were still blank pages. And now, Isla knew what to do with them. She called it the Healer's Covenant, a letter to whoever came after her, whether by blood or by bond. She wrote, "To the one who inherits this flame. I once believed that strength meant never stopping. That worth was measured by how much you could give, how much you could endure. I was wrong. True strength is rhythm. It's knowing when to step forward and when to sit beside someone in silence. It's knowing that your flame isn't meant to burn alone, and that being held is not a weakness, it's a necessity. The world will ask you to give more than you have. Smile anyway. But say no when your spirit whispers for rest. Read this journal when you forget who you are. Add your pages to it when you remember. And above all else, guard your heart. Not by hardening it, but by honoring it." She closed the journal, tied it with new ribbon, and placed it inside the same hearthstone cavity where she had once found her mother's words. It would be there, waiting, like a seed beneath the frost, ready to sprout when the time was right. Years passed. The village knew peace, and Isla aged like the land she loved, slowly, gracefully. Her hair grayed like Seren's once had, her steps softened, but her fire never dimmed. When Seren passed, it was in the garden, surrounded by herbs and songbirds and the scent of sage. Isla buried her beneath the old oak where they had once picked violets in spring. She planted white bellflowers around the base, and each year, they bloomed brighter. The apprentices, now grown, took on their own work. One tended to mountain outposts. One opened a small healing school by the lake. Another became a midwife for the traveling folk. They still wrote letters. Still visited for tea. Still sat by the hearth when their own flames flickered. And Isla kept teaching. Not every day. Not with urgency. But with purpose. One crisp morning, a young girl from the southern valley arrived, barefoot, wild-haired, curious. She carried a basket of mushrooms and a scar across her cheek. "I heard there's a woman here who knows the language of leaves," she said boldly. Isla, now stooped and silver-haired, looked up from her porch. I used to be that woman. The girl blinked. Used to be? I'm still learning new dialects, Isla said with a smile. Come sit. Tell me what the mushrooms taught you. That night, Isla reopened her journal once more and wrote a final line. Let the next flame keeper know this. The heart doesn't run out. It renews, when fed, when loved, when seen. And that, my dear, is the true magic. She tucked the journal back beneath the hearth. And let the fire dance.